throughout any day or time spent with your spouse or your partner, there are constant moments of micro bids for attention or interaction. Anything from a sigh to a come look at this meme I just found on my phone. And anytime you receive or give one of these, the person has the option to ignore it or accept it. And if you ignore it enough times, you build sort of this like habit or first sense in your partner's mind that you're not there for them in a way, and vice versa if you do accept it. And
welcome back, everybody. My name is Emily, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plenty. My husband and I co-founded Plenty after we began merging finances, and we're shocked to find what a mess that could be. We'd both been in Silicon Valley working in fintech for over a decade each, so we set out to build something better. Today, Plenty is a platform helping modern couples invest and plan for their future together. We bring the investment strategies and products of the wealthy to the everyday household. But we also know a relationship is not just about the tools and products, it's also about the conversations. And talking about love and money is still pretty new for our generation. So that's what we set out to do in our podcast to hopefully make it a little bit easier for everybody listening. I'm very excited today to welcome Adam, who is the co-founder and CMO of Ours. He started Ours with Jessica on a mission to help people have happier, healthier lives by investing in their relationship health. Preaching to the choir here for sure. Prior to Ours, Adam worked in growth strategy for Deloitte Consulting, and he has an MBA and MS in design innovation from Northwestern. Thank you so much for coming on our show today, Adam.
I'm excited to be here. This is fun. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's rewind the clock back a little bit. It's 2019. You've decided to start Ours. What fueled that?
Yeah. So at the time I was in grad school, and my wife and I met in undergrad. So we'd been together a while, but we got married in 2017, 2018 while I was in grad school. And shortly after we got married, there was a professor at Northwestern who was releasing a book, and it was about marriage, and he was doing a big kickoff with free food and drinks. So we felt like we had to go, it was free food, free drinks, and we had just gotten married. And we went to this, and the topic of his book was basically a summary of all his research and a lot of other research into what is predictive of a happy, healthy relationship or a marriage. And it really just blew our minds at the time because family in our relationship was an incredibly explicit and important value to us. And yet there were so few ways to kind of intentionally and explicitly invest in that value and just in our relationship. And then we went and to this conference or this presentation and realized there was this entire depth of research and science and professionalism about something that was so important to us. So there were a ton of epiphanies we had during this conference, and I just became fascinated by the idea of relationship health. Shortly after that, I started just interviewing a bunch of my friends at the time, and couples therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and researchers. And after interviewing probably hundreds of them, one of the things I discovered is that more than half of them were in couples therapy or looking for couples therapy or had been. And I had a very stigmatized view of couples therapy at the time. I thought it was something you did if you were about to get divorced, like you see in a rom-com or something like that. And so the stat just blew my mind. I'd been building some social tools for couples, and about that time is when I met Jess as well. And we felt like there was a huge gap between what kind of going to the experience of finding a couples therapist and going to couples therapy could be and should be and what it was. And that was kind of the origin of Ours.
Do you remember what some of those epiphanies were around this whole field of relationship health?
Yeah, I remember a few in particular because they really, really stuck with me. One of them is a really famous concept by the Gottmans, who are arguably the most famous relationship researchers of all time. And it was the idea of a sort of emotional bid minimum response rate, to make it sound like overly scientific or professional. And the idea is that throughout any day or time spent with your spouse or your partner, there are constant moments of micro bids for attention or interaction. Anything from a sigh to a come look at this meme I just found on my phone. And anytime you receive or give one of these, the person has the option to ignore it or accept it. And if you ignore it enough times, you build sort of this like habit or first sense in your partner's mind that you're not there for them in a way, and vice versa, if you do accept it. And at least what they found is that when they looked at the data in couples, couples that responded to more than half, I think, or more than two-thirds of bids were much, much more likely to stay together. And on the flip side, if you were responding to less than a third, the chances or odds of divorce were much higher. And obviously, there's a little bit of correlation here. And, once you know it, it's maybe less helpful than just when you're first observing it. But it made a ton of sense to me. And it was one of those moments that kind of elevates like a micro action that you can have throughout the
Mm,
day. So that one really stuck with me. And then the other one that I think about constantly was by the professor who's Eli Finkel. I'm a big fan of his research. And he did a study where he had couples journal in a very particular way, just a few times throughout the
yeah.
year, call it like 20 minutes. And he had them journal about a conflict they'd recently had from a third party objective perspective. And they found that, compared to a control group, it had a massive impact on marital satisfaction. So it was like 20 minutes a year or something.
Yeah.
And so there's all these micro actions that are low hanging fruit, really, really easy to do relatively with really huge impact. And just the main reason people aren't doing it is because they don't know about it, or if they do know about it, they have some stigmatized view of it. So a lot of what we focus on is accessibility and destigmatization.
Yeah. I really love that, especially that takeaway that it actually isn't, necessarily the big gestures, though those can matter too at moments, but really that is the micro actions. It's actually the things that can be controllable in even 20 minutes. When,
Exactly. Exactly.
use, yeah, and that's incredible. And, one thing I'm curious about is, so you started going, learning more about this. You met your co-founder, Jess, and then you were starting to think about building a company around this. What was that conversation like with your wife to say, hey, I want to go be a startup founder?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm not sure there was a singular moment. It was kind of a very gradual development. Wow, I've worked at a bunch of startups and I find this space really interesting. And then two, it was like, well, here's an idea I am incredibly passionate about. Like I'm really, really interested in this, can't stop thinking about it. And then, so over a period of months, it was kind of building. And then we did kind of have a moment, over probably a few weeks where we were talking about, do I go all in on this, or do I go back to full time, more traditional job? And it was a really fun conversation to be had. I think I was really lucky that my wife had a very stable and successful career at the time, which took a lot of pressure off of me kind of taking the risk. And then two, she had this great line that she said then, and she says it repeatedly now, which is like, worst case, you've spent years improving our relationship, like, which is a really terrible worst case. I hope that's not the case. It doesn't seem to be the case, but she does have a point, like there's some companies you can start, or movements you can start, where if it doesn't work, you're kind of just left with the learnings from the experience. And I do feel really lucky and grateful that every day I get to just learn a little bit more about something so important to me. And so, yeah, I'm just really lucky that she was supportive and is supportive.
Was there anything, in that conversation where, as you were having that, you were also thinking about your family, like what you were going to do next, and how being a startup founder might also potentially play a role in impacting that or contributing to that?
Um, yeah, I think the two big buckets were, three, like where do we want to live, when do we want to have kids, and finances. In terms of where we wanted to live, it ironically made it easier to move to where we wanted to live because I wasn't tied to an office, right? Um, and then in terms of having kids, we just decided to not let it stop us from doing that. And I think we're very lucky now to have two kids we love, and like, we almost played the game of like, should we keep delaying it? And I understand why some people do that, but um, in the end, it ended up being something that we wanted to kind of separate from this decision, you know? Um, and then on the finances side, I think we talked about it a little bit, but we tried not to overthink it because, especially when I first started, I had very clear sort of stage gates to hit. You know, so there was a version of this that was going to only be a 3 month experience or a 6 month experience if we weren't hitting certain milestones. And after each milestone that we were able to hit, it was kind of like, okay, let's keep going. What's the next one? And a very clear one was like, okay, I need to get to a point where I can give myself a salary within like 6 months to a year, call it. And so that was definitely a big part of it, is like not making sure that you have a framework and a system where you can't lie to yourself through clear milestones.
Yeah. I absolutely love that, especially when it comes to a partnership. And I know there's dynamics where your partner wants to be supportive, but it's also helpful when it's also fair to them to give you both a clear milestone to check in at. I love that. So you've now raised $5 million from investors like Serena Williams. What was that like raising from her?
Um, Great. You know, it's through Serena Ventures, which is her fund, which I really admire. My partner Jess did like led that whole initiative, part of the company, and she did a phenomenal job. But it was definitely a sort of like a bucket list moment. I've played tennis my whole life, so it was just very surreal. And I remember sitting there on the Zoom and thinking like, how inappropriate would it be for me to take a screenshot? You know, like is that something I'm allowed to do? Like, I'm sure she gets that all the time. And I was like, no, I can't do this. That would be, that feels wrong. But in general, I think it was great. One thing I really, about that kind of pitch in particular is that she does a very good job of being direct in a way that, like, if she asks a question and she doesn't think that you answered it or you took it in a different direction, she'll just double back. And I think she literally said, like, I don't think you answered my question, you know, which I really admire, you know, just very direct, a lot of candor. So it was fun, very surreal feeling. Yeah.
And when you first started the company, you started off focusing on premarital counseling. How have you seen premarital counseling really help couples?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we hear a lot of different things, but there's sort of a few consistent themes. One is that I think there are often big things that couples don't talk about. Um, and they use this time as a reason or almost like a box to put around a conversation that could otherwise be indefinite. You know, things like long-term goals, family planning, finances is always a big one. And so one way that I think it's really helpful is just that it provides the framework or boundaries for them to have a conversation that is easy to infinitely delay. Two is that I think people just really, really enjoy the experience in that, like, you love someone, you
Mm,
love being around them. And this is just kind of like a unique, novel date, you know? So
yeah.
people, I think, just really benefit from the novelty of the experience. And there's actually a lot of relationship research around how novel date nights are one of the best predictors of marital satisfaction. So that's a whole other thing we talk about. Um, uh, I think those are the two big ones. Maybe the third one I'd throw in there is that often helps people envision their relationship in a way that they haven't, and that they can kind of start to tell the story of who they are in a way that they maybe haven't done explicitly to date yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, for people who haven't gone through premarital counseling, do you have examples of 3 questions that are commonly asked that you do think are critical to talk about early on?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that comes as a surprise to, call it, maybe half the couples that come in, and then the other half maybe not, but is really digging into, did our parents do in their relationship that we want to repeat? And what did they do that we don't want to repeat? And what were they missing that we want to add in? And I think there's almost no exception to a couple that has a amazing experience, or at the very least, a very valuable experience answering that question. And there's a lot of conflict that I think couples experience that has that question at the root of it. a
Yeah.
unknown default that
Yeah.
they're relying on. Um, I think another one is like, where do we want to be in 30 years, 50 years, 10 years, whatever the appropriate long-term question is there. That's kind of an obvious one, but I think it's very rare that people put real color and detail towards that. So for a while, we would
Mm,
often encourage couples to like draw a day in the life of like 20 years from now, what their relationship would be like. And then
yeah.
we had this really cool collage of all these pictures, and they're really beautiful. And then I think the third one is less of a question and more of a um, prompt, which is there are, call it like 10 of those low hanging fruit research based prompts that are just infinitely valuable. And I think it's worth just experiencing those. So we have a lot of ways that when couples join ours, we walk them through those things. But even if you don't join ours, you can Google like 10 research-based relationship hacks and probably find like a little bit of what I'm talking about. And I think that stuff is just always rewarding and fun to read and helpful.
Well, I will follow up with you afterwards for some of those resources so we can make them available too for everybody listening.
That sounds great.
I know if you had asked, me years ago and asked me about premarital counseling, I would have been like, well, like you go to someone, it's usually a religious affiliation and, it's usually something that's done within a church. Is that true or is that wrong?
It's both, I guess. In that, so the origins of like premarital counseling as we know it are typically are I believe secular, but it has been predominantly delivered through religious institutions for most of its history. So the largest and most popular version of that is the Catholic Church's program, which is mandatory to get married by or in a Catholic church. So that's kind of when you have something that's mandatory for so many people, that's definitely going to be what it's most associated with. But it is not inherently religious. Inherently, it's just, can we spend some time to invest in and protect our relationship ahead of time? And it's just that historically, the way most people did that was through a trusted church member. And today, it is still probably the largest way that people get premarital counseling.
Yeah. Would you have any tips for someone who wants to bring it up to their partner, but feels a little bit of worried? Maybe they've never talked about it before, knows that I think for most people, there is some amount of stigma around it. Any tips for that initial conversation?
Yeah, we get that question a lot, actually. So I think we have a few resources that I can also send after this that are written by some of our amazing therapists and will be a better answer than mine. But my answer is that one, it's very idiosyncratic to the relationship, right? Like, for instance, my wife and I, one of our number one values is like directness in communication. So I feel like if we were going to do that, we would just bring it up directly, no matter the topic. But I know that some people don't focus on that as much, and there's a ton of different ways. So one way is like you can suggest a show or a podcast if you want to be very indirect. So like Esther Perel has a great podcast where she does couples therapy. And then there's a really great show on Showtime, I think, that is about couples therapy. So you can be like, hey, why don't we watch this show? And that can create a conversation. And if those are
Mhm.
kind of the two ends of the spectrum from fully direct to like fully indirect, there's also in between. And the most important thing in general, I think, is choosing the right. I learned this from one of our therapists, but choosing the right place to do it. I think where people slip up is when they bring this up during a conflict or during a time when the other person is busy and stressed and not ready to hear it. And they have to be in a place where they can hear it. And I think it's Lauren on our team that wrote an amazing article on this. So I'd love to send that afterwards.
Yeah, please do. I would love to make that available to Esther Perel's Where Should We Begin To is also something that Channing and I have listened to before at points.
It's great. It's like a great long drive listen. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect road trip soundtrack. So one thing that you have also been revealing a little bit more recently has been that you have a new version of your product offering. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So we started out focused on premarital counseling and in particular coaching done by therapists, but coaching. And recently, we kind of reworked the product and expanded, and we now offer couples therapy, not coaching. And then also, we offer it for couples across the entire life stage of their relationship. So, we have couples that are dating all the way to couples that have been together for decades. And that's a really beautiful thing to see. We really want people to feel like they can be with ours from day one to day forever. And the way it works is pretty straightforward. When you sign up, we have a team internally that hand matches every couple, no matter how many couples we have, with the perfect couples therapist for them. So that's based on two things. One is that um, we're very particular about who we work with and who's on the platform, and so all the therapists on the platform are trained in couples counseling and or couples specific work and have experience working with couples. And then two is we spend a lot of time making sure that the therapist is a good fit, which we can talk about more as well. And then you meet with your therapist virtually at whatever pace or speed you'd like. And we have a bunch of tools, a lot of them based on the research we talked about earlier, that kind of sandwich in between sessions and allow you to keep investing whether you're in the session or not.
And from a pricing structure too, what does that look like?
So in general, we have a kind of tiered structure. So a single session is $200 an hour. And then if you sign up for some sort of membership or a package, you can get up to 20% off. And one of the things that we're testing right now as a sort of punctuation point to our mission around accessibility is a $50 first trial session. So we're so confident in kind of like the quality of the experience that we believe what a lot of people need is just to see it and do it once. So anything we can do to help remove that barrier and that stigma to doing your first session and just seeing what it's like and realizing the value you can experience, we're excited to do.
That's incredible. I remember a little bit of the sticker shock of seeing the price for the first time we went to our first session,
Yeah.
outside of ours. This is before you and I met, unfortunately. And I just remember being like, oh, we better be sure that this is worth it too. So that's incredible that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it too is that when you're trying to find someone on your own, you have this sticker shock of like, oh, I'm going to find someone, do 2, 3 sessions, and then I've got to start over if it's not a good fit. And so one of the things we do as well is we have no charge if you're with someone and it's not a good fit. We just find you someone else, and I think that's really important to do. And maybe the other thing I'll say is one of the things that we're trying to do is find ways to make it even more accessible. So we just launched a partnership with Joy, which is a wedding registry where couples can, have their friends and family support their relationship health, which I think is really exciting. And we're going to see if there's ways for employers to help couples do that as well as part of their benefits packages. And there's a lot of fun stuff there.
That's incredible. And, one of the things I think that really sticks out is that you do focus on the fit. For a couple who has never tried couples therapy before, I feel like that's such a common place to be worried about, spending all this money and then it not working out. So what do you guys do to help understand or even see if there's a fit? And for a couple, how do you even know as a couple if it's a fit?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Primarily because if you look at all the research, the therapeutic alliance or the fit between the therapist and the couple is the number one predictor of success in the relationship. Um, and it's hard because it's really hard to quantify. I think a lot of it is just gut, trust, and excitement, like it when you know it. Similar to like, how do you know they're the one, right? There's not a checklist, but And I think it's the
Yeah.
same thing with this in a lot of ways. So I think with couples, personally, I think it's important not to go into optimization mode. Don't go into a session with like a checklist of I want them to talk this way and mention this thing and do that. I think it's more about an overall gut feeling of like, do I think this person is going to help me and help my relationship? And I think in terms of what we do is, regardless of the couple, you're going to have at least one or two things that are important to you. So, for instance, maybe you or your partner was in the military, and it's really important to you that your therapist is a veteran or has experience working with veterans so that you don't have to spend the whole session kind of explaining what it was like, um, then that's something that we just take care of. We're going to make sure that you're with a therapist who has that background. And I think that's the biggest thing you can do is understand what your one or two big things are. Like the one or two things that you need to have in order to get excited and trust the person. And it might be their background, it might be their clinical experience. Maybe there's a modality that you're very passionate about. But that's up to each couple to decide. And we ask during onboarding.
Are there certain questions that couples should talk about themselves before they start the process of trying to find a fit or a match?
Yeah, I think so. This is actually an article we've been wanting to write for a while and we haven't. So maybe this will give me the momentum or the impetus to do it. I think one that not enough couples talk about is what are we afraid of happening in this? I think one of the biggest reasons couples delay going, and you'll often see, depending on the study, that it's between 3 and 7 years from when a couple decides they have a problem and they want help to when they actually go, is that there's some sort of fear there that is or inarticulated. And so I think just have that conversation. Like, I'm afraid they're going to disagree with me on everything or something. So I think asking yourself, what are we afraid of? And then I think the second is being very explicit around what you want to get out of the experience and where you want to go. Like, what will our relationship look like when we're done if this is successful? I think none of these are mind blowing, but I think those are probably the two biggest ones. And then probably a few others on like very specific tactical things. Like, when are we going to protect time for this? Like, what is a valid excuse for us canceling or missing this session, and establishing those ground rules ahead of time as much as you can.
As you've built out your therapist network, what kind of screening does ours do? And is there certain training that you're looking for as you're also trying to think about, how therapists work with clients?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that our team does there. Everything from interviewing therapists and making sure that they're a good fit, to they have to have certain levels of experience. So everyone on the platform is fully licensed, has experience with couples and couples training. They have to be familiar with kind of like the virtual tool set because we're doing telehealth, not in-person therapy. And then one of the things that I'm really excited that we just rolled out and are rolling out more of is our specific training. So Bainu, our head clinician, just rolled out to all our therapists a free premarital counseling training, where she walked a bunch of therapists through a new approach, or kind of like a level 2 approach to premarital counseling, if that makes sense, and what to expect there. So yeah, and then there's also just the obvious stuff that a lot of couples don't do, but it's really important to do, and that I'm glad that we can do, which is like, do you check someone's license? Like, make sure they're actually licensed and make sure all the things that they say are true.
Taking a step back now, you've spent years building ours. What has surprised you about supporting couples so far?
Yeah, I feel like there's a surprise every week. But if I had to talk about the biggest ones, I think the biggest surprise is probably seeing how willing people are to start talking about this, right? Like, when we first started working on the business, like I would tell people and they would like not know what to say, and now we see couples and like posting on Twitter or Instagram, like about to go to our hour session. And I think that's just a really beautiful thing, but also a surprising thing. And it's great. And I hope and think we'll see a lot more of that. Another big one that always surprised me early on, but surprises me less and less now, is how many couples bring work tools and work language into their relationship. Like, go through ours or meet with a couples therapist and then decide that they want to bring even more structure to their relationship. Like, we want to do weekly feedback sessions or track like OKRs, for their relationship. Surprisingly common, We see that a lot, like people with spreadsheets on their relationship, and it's a really cool thing. My wife and I tried out a Slack group for our relationship
Yeah.
for a little, mainly for like family management stuff, and it was great. It's better than a bunch of paper. Uh,
We manage all of our trip planning out of Notion.
yeah, of course. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
For
The more
sure.
tools, the better. Like a Zapier for your relationship. It's great.
I wish there was a Zapier equivalent for dishes or things around the house, but
Yeah,
unfortunately it doesn't exist quite yet.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Is there one relationship ritual that you've learned through your time building ours that has been really helpful or important for your own relationship?
Yeah. I think that we've kind of adapted it to our own relationship, but the biggest one is something called, uh, well, it's called a bunch of things. Some people call it the marriage meeting. Some people call it State of the Union, but just a regular touch base between you and your partner where you're one, appreciating each other, two, talking about what's not well and what is going well. And then three, and this is what we spend like 99% of our time on, is just like planning the week, with two kids and we're both working from home and checking in on our goals for the year together and making sure we carve out time for a date night every week. So this has probably become my favorite habit and the thing that I try to protect the most is like we have to do this time every week. Because otherwise it's too easy to uh, just get underwater and not carve out the time for the things you need.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for that? Because especially I would imagine being a busy startup founder with young kids, it's easy to let that slip. Is there anything that you and your wife say or do to really carve out that time or keep that precious?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, we've been trying for 4 years, and I would say for the majority of 4 years, we have not kept this meeting consistently. And
Mm.
now we've been doing it really consistent. So we're on a little bit of a streak now, which I don't want to jinx. But the thing that has helped the most right now has been I have just an alarm. It's very simple, but I have an alarm on my phone, and like I won't let myself turn it off until we hold the meeting. And it's like for every Friday afternoon. And I would say about half the time we do it Friday afternoon, last minute, and the other half of the time we just wake up at like 5 a.m. on Monday morning or 4 a.m. or 6 a.m. on Monday morning and just do it then. But something about having the alarm on my phone, and it's just such an annoying sound and having it go off over and over. You snooze it like 10 times in a row because you want to get some
Yeah.
emails out the door before the week's over. But that has helped a lot. Like a calendar reminder on our work emails for Friday afternoons that can only get pushed to really early Monday morning. And then maybe the second tactical thing there is like a Google Doc we have. It's just that one doc that we go back to and um, keeping everything there for that meeting. It has been really nice. So we can see um, like this is what we're trying to accomplish this year. And
Hmm.
this is what I wanted to schedule next week or something like that.
Hmm. One other thing that you also mentioned as part of one of the habits that you've worked to form is a weekly date night. That's also, I'd imagine, hard to carve out time for. So are there any tips or tricks you have for carving out and keeping that time sacred?
Yeah, I think it's like you get a looser and looser definition of what a date night is, which it's like, oh, it's a date night. We're going grocery shopping together, and,
Hmm.
but it's just like we consider that time to just be like intentional time together. And sometimes that literally is like going grocery shopping without the kids. But I think the main thing, and I mentioned this before, is really novelty with it. Like all of the research says that is true, and also just it's obviously true, right? Like it's fun to do novel things, and so we try to mix it up a lot. And but I think it's really good to have a very simple but fun fallback. Like for my wife and I, we just really love going for walks in the neighborhood. And so just like worst case, if we don't have time for that, we always have time for, a 20-minute or an hour long walk. Like you can always find time for that. Um, so yeah.
I love that. And for couples who are looking for some ideas for some novel dates, any pointers there?
Yeah, it's interesting because if I'm thinking back to the original paper, it was like they were like novelty can literally mean you go for a walk and you go left instead of right. You know, um, I think it's really that simple. But we do have a list of like 100 novel date ideas or something, so I can send that to you afterwards.
That'd be
But
amazing. Please do.
yeah, there's a bunch that you can do at home. You know, whether it's I spoke with a couple recently who has this really beautiful ritual of like doing a puzzle every week or every few weeks, and I thought that was a really cool one too because a puzzle is a perfect combination of entertaining but not not inhibiting of a conversation. You know, so you can like if you're playing a really intense game of chess or something, maybe you're not talking at all while you're doing it. So it's not really a date as much as it is a competition, but. Yeah,
We've definitely learned that. We are not allowed to play Settlers of Catan together anymore. That has not been healthy for our relationship, but doing all the other activities has been.
one versus one settlers sounds intense.
Yeah. Yeah, we
That's
quickly
great.
learned we were like, we'll be in a healthier place if we don't do this. A little bit
That's amazing. So
competitive.
what do y'all do? What's your biggest I'm curious to flip the question back to you. Like what are your biggest habits and go-to date night as well?
For Channing, definitely when it's his pick, he loves being outdoors. So going out for a hike, we live right next to a trail system. So we're 15 minutes to walk away from the trailheads. So
Oh
for
wow.
that, it's like we go there and we kind of try to take a different trail, even if it's not really a trail, which works much better when it's not raining a lot. For me, typically it's picking a new recipe. And so it is just going,
Oh, that's
usually New
great.
York Times. I love grocery store dates. So being able to leisurely browse in a grocery store, that's incredible. We don't live near an Eataly, but probably one of my favorite experiences is going to New York at Eataly because you can take a glass of wine with you as you walk very slowly through the grocery store, pick up whatever you
That's
need to
great.
make dinner, and then you can actually go make dinner.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love those. Those are great.
Awesome. Well, Adam, thank you so much for making time for a show today. I have two quick lightning round questions for you to wrap up, if that sounds good.
Yeah, let's do it.
First one, what is your favorite productivity hack?
Not super exciting, but setting a timer, you know, 30 minutes, hour, whatever it may be, and not allowing myself to do anything but the thing for that time period. You know, phones in the other room, computers, internet is off, you know, and can't do anything except that.
Love that. And potentially an alarm that is incredibly annoying you can't turn off.
Yeah, exactly. Very much, very much. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. And what is one bucket list experience that you're really excited to do with your wife and your kids?
Yeah, we really want to go to Japan at some point in the next 10 years. No plans to do so yet, but that's been on our list forever. Um, and it'd be great to go with the kids if we can. If not that, I think we live in Texas and
Mhm.
it's not like the craziest bucket list thing, but just my kids have never seen snow, you know, and I'm just so excited for them to like throw a snowball and it's just going to blow their minds. I mean, one of them's a baby, so anything would blow her mind right now. But the 3.5 year old would just freak. And that definitely sounds more fun than anything I can imagine.
As someone who is Canadian and grew up in the North, I would say I'm also very excited for that video one day when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
could see snow because we grew up in the darkness and snow.
Yes,
Awesome. Well,
exactly, exactly.
we'll have to, I'm excited for that at some point and potentially plan some kind of snow trip.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me on this. This was fun to chat. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for making time.